Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Rosh Hashana Daf is completely devoted to the discussion of the Isser of Baal Ta'acher, the halacha that it is forbidden to delay something which you owe to Hektish, to the Beis HaMikdash, a carbon, or a list of other things which a person may have pledged. And you may not delay giving it, and we had seen 5 opinions as to how long you have until you violate the Isser. The Gemara here is going to discuss a number of halachas related to Baal Ta'acher. First, we're going to conclude a discussion about how we learn the various different halachas out of the pasuk of Kisido Neder. Then the Gemara will move on to the next pasuk, which is Moses V'Secha Tishmar V'Asisa. The Gemara will learn a number of halachas out of there. Very many of them are repeating the ones we've seen in the first pasuk. The Gemara will explain why I need both of them. Then the Gemara will discuss 5 halachas of Baal Ta'acher. 2 of them we will state and have questions on, and 3 of them we will ask as a question, what is the halacha, and we will attempt to resolve it. So first of all, as it begins the daf, we are in the middle of discussion of the pasuk of Hisido Neder L'Shem Lekachal Es'achal L'Shalmai. When you promise, when you pledge a neder, a vow to Hashem, you should not delay paying it. Hashem will demand it from you. And the last line, the Gemara says, means that there's only a chait, there's only something lacking in you if you don't give it, but there's nothing wrong with the carbon itself. The carbon itself is not puzzle. So the Gemara now asks, there's a different source for the halacha that the carbon does not become puzzle if it's delayed. We've already seen one other source that we explained why we need it. Now the Gemara has a third source. The Gemara says that the source is brought by Ben Assay, and it's from a pasuk discussing the halacha of pigul. A certain kabbanis could get a psul called pigul if at the time of the avodah you had in mind that you would do the other avodas in the wrong time. So in the pasuk of pigul it says lo yeratze hamakriv also lo yechashiv. It does not count. It's not good. The carbon is disqualified. But it says the word also. It is disqualified. That is excluding something. The Gemara says the exclusion is that this is the only carbon which is disqualified. But Baal Ta'acher does not disqualify a carbon. If you violate the Isser, if you take too long to bring it, you don't disqualify the carbon. If you have the animal and you don't bring it on time, it doesn't make it possible. You could still bring it later. You just violate the Isser of Baal Ta'acher. So that's another source. So why do we need our source over here? So the Gemara says, you're right. That is the real source of this halacha. By us, the pasuk of Haya B'chal Chet is teaching something else. It's not teaching that you have a chait and the animal, the carbon, does not have a chait. It's teaching that you have a chait and your wife does not have a chait. What does your wife have to do with anything? Because if a person owes money and doesn't pay it, the punishment that he gets is that he loses his wife. There's a pasuk in Mishlei that says, if you don't have what to pay, why do you lose your wife? But there it says that you lose your wife if you don't pay back your dues. Maybe if you don't have it, so it's not your fault, you won't. But the question is, does that apply if you owe something to Shemayim as well? And therefore, our pasuk here, teaches no. Only you have a chet, your wife doesn't have any chet. You're not going to lose your wife because you didn't pay your dues to Shemayim. It only applies if you don't pay your dues to other people. Okay, now the Gemara brings another pasuk. It's the next pasuk in line after this one, and it says as follows: Tishmar v'asisa. What comes out of your mouth, you should watch, you should guard, and you should do it. Kasher nadarta, like you vowed, like you pledged. L'Hashem lekachad Hashem your God. Nedava, it should be a nedava. Asher dibarta beficha, that you spoke with your mouth. So the Gemara says, what are all these phrases here for? So the Gemara says this the following thing: Mitzvah vasecha, that you should do what comes out of your mouth. That's that there is a mitzvah assay. You have a mitzvah assay to do what you said. If you don't do it, on time, you violate an assay. Tishmar, you have to guard. Guarding is always language of a loisa asay. That is a negative commandment. There, that's an isser, that you are over an isser if you don't bring it within the restricted time. Now, v'asisa, that means that they will make you do it. That means that Beis Din is obligated to make a person fulfill his obligation on a time. Now, kasher nadarta, that's to teach you that any neder, anytime you vow to bring a carbon as a neder, you say, I'm going to bring a carbon, the obligation's on you. That's included. Hashem Elokecha is to include all the mandatory karbanos, chatas, asham, oil, shlamim, and all those that are included. Nedava is the next word in the pasuk. That's to include a carbon where you say this animal is a carbon. Not that I promise to bring one, but that I make this animal into a carbon. Asher dibarta, that refers to any other type of kachay by the kabayas, and the beficha, that refers to tzedakah. Extra phrase is linking us to tzedakah. So now the Gemara wants to go through this one by one and see why exactly we need all of these. And the Gemara first starts with the first three halachos all in a group to tell me that Moises Vasecha is that there is a chiyuv assay. You violate an assay if you don't bring it on time. So you don't need that because we already said in the last daf you learned that from uvasa shama v'havesim shama. When you go to be'ola rega to the Beis Hamikdash on the Chag, you have to bring your things that you owe. So why do I need to repeat it here? Question number one. Question number two. Why do you have to say Tishmar to teach me that there's a loisa say? You have loisa acher. The previous pasuk says loisa acher. That's balta acher. And the last thing is vasisa, that Bezin has to force you. Why do you learn that from here? You have a different place for that because it says yakriv oisai. There's a pasuk that says el pesach oil moed. And the phrase yakriv oisai is an extra phrase to teach that they will make you be makriv oisai. Right? Now, the Gemara quotes a brisa that shows that Yaakov Osai, that teaches me that we force a person to bring what he promised, what he pledged. Now, you may think that means we just do it for him, we just force it out of him, but that's not what we do, because it says L'Ritzayna, it has to be with his will. So what do? We beat him until he says, I want to, and that's kind of a mixture. You got him to say, I want to, by forcing him. Anyway, bottom line is that we have these three halachos, Assay, Lois Assay, and that the Bezin forces you to. Those are repeated. We learned from the first pasuk why they're repeated here. So the Gemara answers that there's two types of situation in which a person pledges something and doesn't keep it. Two types of pledges. One is a verbal pledge, where you say, I'm going to bring a carbon, and you never actually do anything about it. Another one is where you actually go ahead and you make an animal into a carbon, so you've created the carbon, it exists in the world, but you don't bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. So you need both sets of halachos from different psukim for both of them. Now, why do I need two sets? Why can't I learn from the other? So Gemara says, because which one do you think is worse? If you say you're going to do something, you don't do anything about it, is that worse? In a sense, that is worse because you didn't do what you said. You know, the halachas, you have to do what you said. You didn't create the hektish you're supposed to. On the other hand, maybe it's worse if you actually are makdish and you don't bring it to the Beis Hamikdash because now you're keeping hektish by you. It's not just you didn't keep your word. You have hektish that you're keeping to yourself. You're not bringing it to the Beis Hamikdash. So we don't know which one is worse, and therefore we have to say both of them with two separate psukim are spelled out. Okay, now the Gemara says, but hold on a second. The Torah in the pasuk clearly said neder or nidava. Now what's the difference between a neder and a nidava? A neder is where you say, I promise to do it, and you're responsible. If you, let's say, promise to do it, you pledge to bring a carbon ola, let's say. And then you set aside an animal to be an ola, and it gets destroyed. Well, you have to bring another one, because your pledge is on you. On the other hand, if you say that this animal is an ola, you never pledged to bring an ola. You just said, this animal is now an ola, so you have to bring it. But if it gets destroyed, okay, your ola is gone. You don't have to bring another one. You don't have any personal obligation. That's the difference between a neder and a nidava. So the Gemara says then how could you tell me that one of these is referring to where you pledged, you made an animal as a nedava, but you didn't, but it was where you said you're going to do it, and you didn't go ahead and do it. That could only be a neder. And both sets of psukim both talk about neder and nedava. How can you tell me one of them is referring to where you said but you didn't do it? There's no way to make a nedava without being makdish. The whole way you make nedava is by being makdish. So my answer is no, there's another way to make an nedava without being makdish. That's where you say, I pledge to do it, on condition that I don't have responsibility to make up for it if it gets destroyed. Meaning you say, I pledge to bring an animal, but I'm going to set one aside, and when I do, I have no longer responsibility to replace it. You can say that, if you do that. So you haven't been makdish anything yet, but what you're really doing is making an nedava. You're pledging to make an nedava. You're saying that I'm going to be makdish a certain animal as a carbon. I'm pledging to do that. So this counts as a nedava, but you didn't actually do anything yet. You just spoke. And then if you never get around to do it, that'll be a case where you pledge to make a nedava, but you didn't actually do the nedava. And that's what the pasuk is referring to when it says nedava, even though that might be the set of halachos that we're learning from that pasuk that's talking about where you only said and you didn't actually do anything. Okay. Now the Gemara begins its list of halachos over here. So halacha number 1, the Gemara says Rava. He says that tzedakah, if you pledge to give tzedakah, you're obligated to give it right away. There is no waiting period of 3 Yamatophan. It's not like a karbanos. The reason is because there are poor people around and they need the money, therefore you have to give it right away. So the Gemara says, of course, that's obvious. Why would I think not? You pledge to give tzedakah, give it right away. So the Gemara says, no. I need you to teach me this because the halacha that you have to give tzedakah and you shouldn't delay is listed in the same pasuk as the halacha you have to bring karbanos. Karbanos you have up to a year, maybe even up to 5 regalim, depending on who you hold like. So you may think that the same thing applies to tzedakah. Rava comes to teach me, no, since the poor people around, you got to bring it right away. Okay, next halacha. Rava says, when do you violate the Isser Assay? So we've been discussing on our last daf how long you have till you violate the Baal Ta'achar, the Lois Assay. When do you violate the Assay? So Rava says, everybody would agree, one chag, one regel, one either Pesach, Shavuos, or Sukkot goes by and you didn't bring it, you violate it. You are over the Isser Assay. The Gemara says, how could that be? We have an incident where Talmidei Chachamim let a Yantif go by without breaking something. Obviously, they felt that they weren't violating an Isser Assay. What's the case? So Rav Yeshua and Rav Papias discussed the case where they brought a carbon Pesach, and the carbon Pesach was pregnant, and before they shechted it, it gave birth. It was a carbon Shlamim on Pesach is what it was, and it gave birth. And he said that we ate the Shlamim on Pesach, and the baby we brought as a carbon on Chag. Now Chag usually refers to Sukkot. So if it was something that we owed, because it's what this animal is a Vlad Shlamim. It is the offspring was born from an animal that was already set aside as a carbon shlamim. The halacha is that a vlad shlamim you have to bring as a carbon shlamim. So they were obligated to bring it right away. So on Pesach itself they couldn't bring it, maybe it was too young. The halacha is you can't bring a carbon under 8 days old. Fine, so maybe the whole Pesach was under 8 days old. But Shavuos, if it was born on Pesach, it had to be born because its mother was slaughtered on Pesach. So then Shavuos they should have brought it. By not bringing it till Sukkot, they violate the Isser Assay according to Rava. Must be Rava's wrong. It's not an Isser Assay. The Isser Assay is not hitting you already as soon as one Chag goes by. So the Gemara gives 2 answers here. The Gemara says that Rav Zvid said in the name of Rava that they couldn't bring the animal as a carbon on Shavuos because it got sick. Rav Ashi says it's a different pshat. Chag here doesn't mean Shavuos. Chag here doesn't mean Sukkot. Chag usually means Sukkot. Here means Shavuos. They brought it on Shavuos. So Gemara says the other one, Rav Zvid, didn't want to accept that. He said whenever you're talking about Pesach and then you say Chag, you can't mean Shavuos, because whenever you say Pesach and you refer to Shavuos right away, you say Atzeres. You don't say Chag. So it's got to be that it's referring to Sukkot, not to Atzeres. Okay, Rav is next halacha. He says that once 3 months pass by, that is, you expired, now you're in the Baal Ta'achar territory, you violated the Isser of Baal Ta'achar. It says, Rav, it's a new lav every day that goes by. Each day that passes after your deadline is a new lav. So Gemara says, a kasha on that. What's the kasha? Brisa says that a Bechor, or any other type of hektish, once you pass through, and here's 2 choices here. The Brisa here is defining what the deadline for Baal Ta'achar is, and it says either one of these 2, either 3 Yomim Tovim or a full year. 3 Yom Tovim without a full year, or a full year without 3 Yom Tovim. Either one, the Gemara will explain how it's possible. Either one, you violate the Isser of Baal Ta'achar. But it doesn't say every day. So Gemara says, what kind of kasha is that? He's just telling you violate the Isser of Baal Ta'achar. He's not saying that it's every day or not. The Gemara says, no. If he's coming to teach you how you get nailed by Lavin, so he should tell you every single day. He's coming to say, as soon as it is, how much, when are you already in the danger zone of Lavin, of Baal Ta'achar, should say each one every day. Says, that's not such kasha. He was not coming to tell you about how many. He's just coming to tell you when the Lavin begin. That's such kasha. Okay, the Gemara now wants to know how is it possible to have 3 Yom Tovim without a year, or a year without 3 Yom Tovim. So the Gemara says 3 Yom Tovim without a year. Simple, I understand that. You made your pledge, let's say, right before Pesach. By the time Sukkot is over, 3 Yom Tovim have gone by, but it's not a full year. How can you have, though, a full year without 3 Yom Tovim going by? So Gemara says, according to the opinion that says that 3 Yom Tovim means 3 Yom Tovim in order, beginning with Pesach and ending with Sukkot, there is a way. The way would be that if you, let's say, pledged right after Pesach, 1 full year later, you haven't got 3 Yom Tovim in order. You had Shavuos, Sukkot, and Pesach, but it's not in the right order. So it doesn't count. But according to all the other opinions, it doesn't have to be in order. So how do you have a full year go by without 3 Yom Tovim? So the Gemara says it depends how you define a year. As a machlokes, how you define a year. Concerning the halacha of Violate Ari Chema, there's a question of how we define a year, and there's 2 opinions, the Chachamim and Rebbe. Rebbe says 365 days, 1 solar year. That's the definition of a year. According to that, it's very simple. We're talking about a leap year, and let's say you pledged right after Pesach. 365 days later is before the next Pesach, because there are 2 others. So you have 365 days later, a year has finished, and you haven't got through Pesach yet. So therefore, you have a year without 3 Yamatophan. The Gemara says, but according to the Chachamim, who say that a year is 12 months, or if it's a leap year, 13 months, so you got to have 12 months to have a year. How are you going to have 12 months without 3 Yamim Tov? So the Gemara says it's possible. It's possible according to the opinion of Rav Shmaya. Shmaya says that Shavuos moves around. Shavuos could either be on the 5th, 6th, or 7th of the month of Sivan. How so? It depends how many days are in the month of Nisan and how many days are in the month of Iyar. If they both have only 29 days, then what's going to end up happening is that 50 days after Pesach will end up being on the 5th of... will end up being on the 7th, I should say, of the month of Sivan. If they both have 30 days, so you'll get your 50 days in much faster, and then 50 days after the second day of Pesach, which is when Shavuos is, will end up being on the 5th of the month of Sivan. So again, if they're both 29, then it's on the 7th. If they're both 30, then Shavuos comes out on the 5th. If one is 29 days and one is 30 days, then 50 days will end on the 6th. So therefore, it can come out as follows. 1 year, Shavuos was on the 5th. On the 6th, Shavuos was on the 5th of Sivan. On the 6th of Sivan that year, a person pledged. He's going to bring a carbon. Now the next year, Shavuos was on the 7th. So by the time he gets to the 6th of Sivan, a year has been completed, and he has not gone through Shavuos yet, because he pledged the day after Shavuos, and his year is up the day before Shavuos. So it's possible. Okay, very nice. Now the Gemara wants to know who argues on Reb Shmaya, who has a different understanding of how Shavuos works. The Gemara says is the opinion of Acherim. Acherim holds that every single month has a set amount of days. It doesn't change, and therefore you can never have any variables, and it alternates every other month. It goes 29-30, 29-30, 29-30, and if there's a leap year, then the leap month is always 29. Therefore, it always comes out as follows. There are 354 days in 12 months in the calendar year. 354 times 29, 12 times 29 and a half. You're going to have 354 days. Now, 350 days is 50 weeks. So that would be, if it would be 350 days, it would be the same day of the week. Every single year would be Yantif. Each Yantif would be the same day of the week. So we have an extra 4 days. That means Yantif is always 4 days later than it was. It's 4 days later in the week than it was the year before, because it's 350 is exact weeks, but it's 354 days, so it's 1 day later. And if it's a leap year, then you have an extra month, which is 29 days. You have 1 extra day, so then it's going to be 5 days later. Okay. But what you see from him, at least, is that Shavuos is always going to end up on the 6th of the month of Sivan, like we have it today, because Iyar and Nisan, one will always be 29 and one will always be 30. Can't be any variables. Okay, the Gemara says, let's go on to our next halacha. And here the Gemara has questions. So the Gemara's first question is, somebody who inherits his father's obligation to bring a carbon, does he have an Isser Baal Ta'achar or not? I mean, his father pledged a carbon. He didn't get a chance to bring it before he died. This person inherits the estate. He's obligated to bring that carbon. Does he have an Isser Baal Ta'achar? So the Gemara says, what's the 2 sides of the argument? First, the Torah says, Ki sidor neder, when you shall pledge a pledge. I didn't pledge a pledge, so it's not talking to me. That's what the inheritor could say. On the other hand, it does say, Vasa shama v'havesim shama. When you go and you are ola regularly, you have to bring all your obligations. So maybe he does have that obligation on him, because he is somebody who has an obligation and he's coming to the Beis HaMikdash. So, which is it? So the Gemara says that we learn out of the word me'imach. The Torah says in the pasuk describing Ki Sidor, it says Ki Doroshi Me'imach. Me'imach teaches you that it's from you, whether or not you were the one who made the neder. Even if you're just a Yerush Me'imach, you have to bring it from you. It will be demanded from you. So Gemara says, we learned something else. We learned that to teach me the halacha that leket, chukcha, and peah has to be given right away. So Gemara says, no, that's from imach. The extra mem, may imach, that teaches me that it has to be brought even from a yoresh. Okay, next question. This is also Reb Zera. What about a woman? A woman who owes a carbon, does she have Baal Ta'achar or not? What's the two sides of this question? It says, on the one hand, she does not have a mitzvah to be Ola Regel. It says, Kol Zuchurcha, all your males have to go. She doesn't have a mitzvah to be Ola Regel. She doesn't have Uvasa Shama V'Havesim Shama. She doesn't have that obligation. On the other hand, she does have to go to the base of Mikdash on Yontif because she has a mitzvah of Simchas Yontif. She has a mitzvah of a carbon Shlamim. So she doesn't have the real mitzvah Ola Regel, but she has to go anyway for other reasons. So what's the halacha there? Do we say that she therefore has to bring it or not? So Abaye says it should be obvious. We know that she has a mitzvah of simcha. Why is there any discussion about this? So Gemara says, hold on a second. Abaye holds that there's a mitzvah of simcha. A woman has a mitzvah to go to the Beis Hamikdash to be misameach. Don't we know that Abaye says that a woman's mitzvah of simcha is that her husband should buy her something nice for Yantiv? That's what the mitzvah of simcha for an isha is. Someone says, yeah, Abaye was just saying according to Rabbi Zera, who holds it, there's a mitzvah of simcha that a woman has to go to the Beis Hamikdash. It should be simple, should be obvious that she has to bring it. What's the difference if it's because of mitzvah of alila regel or a mitzvah of simcha? Okay, the Gemara's next question is about a bukhar. Bukhar, the halacha is you have to eat it or bring it as a carbon within a year. So Gemara wants to know, when do you start counting the year? Do you start counting it from birth, or do you start counting it from when it's ready to be brought as a carbon, which is when it's 8 days old? So Gemara says is different halachas that are said by Abaye and Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. Abaye said from birth is when you start counting the year, and Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said from when it's 8 days old, from when it's old enough to be brought. The Gemara says it's dana machlokes. One is talking about where it's a tam, it's a healthy animal that has no movement, it's going to be brought as a carbon. Since it's going to be brought as a carbon, it has to be that you have to start counting the year from when it's old enough to be actually brought as a carbon, which is when it's 8 days old. When it's 8 days old, you can bring it as a carbon. That's when you're going to start counting because it's actually going to be brought as a carbon. If, however, you're talking about a Baal Mom, where you're not going to bring it as a carbon, you're just going to eat it, so then you start counting from birth because you don't have to worry about the halacha that it can't be brought as a carbon until it's 8 days old. Boy, what do you mean? You can't eat it right away either. You have to wait a while after it's born to make sure that it's not a nefel, to make sure that it's not going to die right away within 30 days. It's not just a real miscarriage. You have to make sure that it's going to live. Otherwise, it's treif. It's usher to eat anyway. So you shouldn't start counting till after 30 days then. Samara says, no. We're talking about a case where you know it's definitely not a nefel. You know when the animal conceived, and you know that it carried it to term, and therefore it's not a miscarriage, it's not an early birth, and it counts. Okay, that concludes the daf. What have we learned here on the daf? We've learned 2 psukim with all the halachas of Baal Ta'achar. The one immediately following the other. The Gemara explains why we need a lot of the halachas repeated. The Gemara had said that when it says lo yibchached, it's not referring to exclude the fact that the animal is not disqualified. It means that you're not going to lose your wife. The 3 halachos are repeated because there's 2 types of neder. There's a verbal neder, which you didn't actually set aside, and then there's an animal that you set aside that you didn't actually bring. Then the Gemara had 5 or 6 halachic questions. We had halachas that we said. We had the halacha that somebody who allows one yontif to go by violates an iser assay. The Gemara explained why that's not a kash from the case of the shlamim that was waited until Sukkot. Gemara said maybe it was brought till Shuas. The Gemara's next halacha was that every day that goes by you violate another halacha. We answered a kash on that. Then the Gemara had the halacha about the year without a regel, without 3 regalim, and 3 regalim without a year. We explained how that's possible. Either that you have a leap year and you have 365 days go by, or it's Shavuos, and you had Shavuos was the first year on the 5th, and then on the 7th, and therefore from 6 to 6 is a full year. Then the Gemara had a couple of questions from Rabbi Zera about a Yoresh, which the Gemara said is responsible to bring it, about a woman, which the Gemara said is responsible to bring it, and when you count the Bukhar, depends if it's being brought as a carbon, then you count it from when it is 8 days old, and if it's a balmum that you're going to eat, so if you don't know that it was full term, then you'll have to count from when it's 30 days old, and if you know it's full term, you would count from
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.